The book of Job is often described as one of the most heartbreaking works in the entire Bible, not only because it tells the story of a man who loses everything, but because it forces us to face the most difficult questions of life. Why does suffering come to those who live with faith and integrity? Why does pain strike when least expected, leaving us searching for answers that do not come easily? Job's journey touches something deeply human within us all, for his story mirrors the struggles we face in times of grief, loss, and unanswered prayer. What makes this account so moving is that Job is not a man of corruption or rebellion. He is introduced as upright, faithful, and blameless, someone who honors God and turns away from evil. He is blessed with abundance, surrounded by family, and known for his integrity. By all appearances, he should be a man shielded from tragedy. Yet when his world suddenly collapses, the heartbreak is almost unbearable. His story is a reminder that suffering does not always come because of wrongdoing, and that even the righteous must sometimes walk through the valley of shadows. The silence of heaven in Job's suffering is one of the most haunting elements of his story. He cries out with anguish, yet answers do not come. This silence echoes the experiences of many who have prayed desperately and felt only the weight of unanswered questions. It is here that the book of Job grips us so powerfully, for it refuses to give easy explanations and instead draws us into the mystery of faith lived in the midst of pain. Yet within this heartbreak lies a beauty that endures through the centuries. Job's honesty in his prayers, his refusal to let go of God, even when all else is stripped away, and the final encounter with the voice from the storm reveal that faith is not destroyed by suffering, but often refined in its fire. His life reminds us that endurance in the face of unanswerable sorrow can lead to a deeper encounter with God, even when explanations remain hidden. For anyone who has walked through grief, felt abandoned, or questioned the meaning of suffering, Job's story is not distant or abstract. It is a mirror held up to the human soul, showing the rawness of pain, but also the possibility of hope. His tears become our tears, and his questions become our questions, making his story both deeply personal and universally relevant. Before we continue exploring this remarkable journey, I want to invite you to be part of this space where faith, wisdom, and encouragement are shared. If you enjoy videos like this and want to hear more reflections on the Word of God, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Click the like button if this introduction speaks to you, and share your own thoughts in the comments below. Your reflections not only strengthen this community, but also remind others that they are not alone in their journey. Job is first introduced not as a man of weakness or failure, but as one who stands tall in righteousness. The description of his life at the beginning is striking because it paints a picture of someone whose devotion to God was complete. He lived in the land of Uz, a man described as blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil. This was not a casual statement. It was a declaration of his character and the foundation of his life. In a world where faith could be shallow or mixed with compromise, Job's faith was pure, his devotion sincere. His prosperity reflected the blessings that surrounded him. Job was wealthy by every measure known in his time. Thousands of livestock grazed under his care, and his household was vast, with many servants attending to the demands of such abundance. His name carried weight among the people, for his wisdom and influence were well known. He stood as the greatest of all the men of the East, and with his position came honor, respect, and admiration. He was not only a man of riches, but also one whose integrity made him a beacon of what it meant to live rightly before God. Yet what sets Job apart is not his wealth or his influence, but his heart as a father and as a servant of the Almighty. His children would gather together, celebrating with feasts and joy, and Job would rise early to offer burnt offerings for each one of them, saying, "It may be that my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts." This daily devotion reveals the depth of his concern for the purity of his family. He did not simply guard his own soul, he interceded for the souls of his children. His faith was not confined to ritual, but expressed in love, responsibility, and vigilance. It is easy to admire such a man, for he embodies the picture of one whose life appears complete. His piety was unwavering, his household united, his wealth abundant, and his reputation spotless. Yet beneath this harmony lay a mystery soon to unfold. The very perfection of Job's life makes the sorrow that follows so shocking. The reader is not prepared for tragedy, for everything about Job seems to suggest stability and divine favor. His life, at this point, could be seen as the very reward of faithful living, a model for others to follow. This contrast is what deepens the heartbreak of his story. The more one sees the goodness of Job, the more painful it becomes when calamity strikes. His devotion rules out the easy answers people often cling to, that suffering is the result of sin, or that pain is simply punishment for disobedience. Job's life dismantles such notions from the beginning, making clear that the tragedy to come is not the fruit of hidden guilt, but something far more mysterious. Job's faith before the tragedy is not an ornament or a detail, but the very anchor of the story. Without it, his losses would not strike with such force. His character is the measure against which the calamity is weighed, and it is why the account continues to pierce hearts across the ages. The righteous man who feared God is about to be tested in ways unimaginable, and the world will be forced to ask whether faith can survive when every reason to believe seems to vanish. The peace of Job's life collapses with shocking speed. One moment he stands as the most respected man of his region, surrounded by family, wealth, and health, and the next, messengers arrive one after another, each carrying news darker than the last. The suddenness of it all is overwhelming. His oxen and donkeys are carried away, his servants are struck down, his sheep consumed by fire from heaven, his camels stolen, and then the heaviest blow of all, a mighty wind collapses the house where his sons and daughters were feasting, leaving none alive. Each report cuts deeper, and before Job can recover from one, another comes. The picture of devastation is almost beyond comprehension. In the span of a single day, Job loses not only his wealth but the very heartbeat of his life, his children. The joy of his household vanishes, replaced by silence and grief. These are not ordinary losses but total ruin, a dismantling of all that gave his life rhythm and meaning. The narrative spares no detail in showing the complete collapse of his world. What makes the moment even more haunting is the silence that follows. No voice from heaven breaks through to explain the purpose of such pain. No angel arrives to reassure Job of divine favor. He is left with ashes, grief, and questions that will echo throughout the rest of the story. The silence of heaven in the face of such tragedy becomes one of the most unsettling aspects of his suffering. It is not simply the loss itself, but the absence of answers that pierces the soul. Job's response in this moment reveals the depth of his faith, even as the weight of sorrow presses upon him. He tears his robe, shaves his head, and falls to the ground in worship, declaring, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I shall return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." Such words carry an almost unbearable beauty, for they emerge from the mouth of one who has lost everything. It is not a denial of grief, but a declaration of trust in the midst of ruin. Yet the heartbreak remains. Even though Job does not curse God, the silence of heaven lingers, and the reader is left to wonder why such faith must endure such suffering. It is the combination of loss and unanswered questions that makes this moment so devastating. The narrative draws the reader into Job's pain, forcing them to feel not only the grief of loss, but the ache of silence. The tragedy does not end there. Job's health is soon struck down, and his body is covered with painful sores from head to toe. Once admired by many, he now sits in the dust, scraping his skin with broken pottery. His condition becomes so dire that even his wife, overwhelmed by the sight of his suffering, urges him to curse God and die. It is a scene of utter desolation where everything that once defined Job has been stripped away, leaving only a man in agony and confusion. This silence from heaven remains one of the most enduring aspects of the book of Job. The unanswered cries of the righteous stand as a mirror for all who have endured suffering without explanation. The loss is crushing, but the lack of response intensifies the weight of grief, making Job's story a reflection of every human heart that has cried out to God and heard nothing in return. The opening calamities are more than historical events recorded in an ancient text. They represent the universal experience of sudden loss, unanswered prayer, and the silence that often follows tragedy. This silence is what gives the story its depth, its haunting power, and its ability to speak across generations to those who have known the ache of heaven's stillness. In the midst of his suffering, Job's friends arrive. At first, their presence seems like a gift, for Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar come to sit with him in silence for 7 days and 7 nights. They see the depth of his pain, and their initial response is to join him in mourning. They weep, they tear their robes, and they sprinkle dust on their heads. For a moment, their companionship seems genuine, an acknowledgement of suffering too deep for words. Yet silence does not remain. When they finally begin to speak, their words become daggers rather than healing balm. Instead of offering comfort, they offer explanations, each suggesting in their own way that Job's suffering must be the result of hidden sin. Their speeches circle around a single idea: that suffering does not come without cause, and that Job's losses are evidence of divine judgment. What was meant to console becomes a burden, and their presence turns into another trial for Job to endure. Eliphaz speaks first, reminding Job that he had once instructed others to remain firm in times of trouble, and then suggesting that Job's suffering is a result of his own faults. Bildad follows, pressing the idea that Job's children must have sinned and that his suffering is proof of God's justice. Zophar is the harshest, urging Job to repent and accusing him of speaking empty words. Each friend, rather than easing his pain, deepens it, replacing comfort with condemnation. This betrayal is one of the most heartbreaking layers of Job's experience. In the darkest season of his life, the people who should have lifted him up instead push him down. Their theology is simple, their judgment swift, and their compassion shallow. For Job, the wound of being misunderstood by those closest to him adds to the crushing weight of his loss. The failure of his friends reflects a broader human tendency. When confronted with suffering, many seek quick explanations, neat answers that remove the discomfort of mystery. Yet in doing so, they risk adding to the pain of the afflicted, turning their words into weapons rather than healing. Job's friends embody this danger, showing how even well-meaning people can wound deeply when they speak without true understanding or compassion. Their words reveal not only their misunderstanding of Job, but also a distortion of God's character. By insisting that suffering is always a result of sin, they reduce divine justice to a system of simple cause and effect. In doing so, they fail to see the larger picture and misrepresent the very God they claim to defend. Their speeches highlight the danger of speaking about divine mysteries with arrogance, especially in the presence of human sorrow. For Job, the weight of their accusations is unbearable. His grief is already heavy, and now he must defend his integrity against those who should have stood with him. The loneliness deepens as he realizes that even among companions, he is misunderstood and judged. The companionship that once seemed like a blessing becomes another source of sorrow, making his journey even more painful. The arrival of Job's friends serves as a reminder that words carry great power in times of suffering. They can either heal or harm, comfort or condemn. The heartbreak of this portion of the story lies not only in Job's continued suffering, but in the betrayal of trust by those who should have been his refuge. It is a reminder for every generation of the importance of presence, compassion, and humility when standing alongside the brokenhearted. Left with loss, pain, and accusations, Job's voice rises from the ashes in raw honesty. He does not remain silent, nor does he mask his grief with polite words. Instead, he pours out his anguish, cursing the day of his birth and wishing that he had never seen the light of life. His cries are not polished prayers, but desperate expressions of a heart that cannot contain its sorrow. Job's lament is striking because it strips away every pretense. He does not speak as one afraid of offending heaven, but as one too broken to hide his pain. He longs for rest, for an end to the agony that consumes him, and he questions why life was given to one destined for such misery. These cries capture the honesty of suffering, the unfiltered voice of a soul overwhelmed by despair. His questions cut to the heart of human existence. Why do the innocent suffer? Why does God allow agony to rest on the shoulders of the righteous? Why does life continue when death seems like mercy? These are not abstract questions, but the cries of a man whose wounds are still open, whose losses still bleed. His words echo the questions that countless souls have whispered in moments of despair, making his voice timeless and universal. The beauty of Job's cry lies not in its answers, but in its authenticity. Unlike many portrayals of faith that hide pain behind polite words, Job's prayers reveal a faith that engages with God honestly, even in anger and confusion. His willingness to bring his true feelings before the Almighty shows a depth of relationship that does not fear transparency. It is a faith that survives not by denying pain, but by expressing it fully. The weight of his lament is magnified by the silence that still lingers. Job cries out, but heaven does not immediately respond. His words rise into the void, unanswered, uncomforted. This silence does not weaken his cry, but intensifies it, showing the persistence of faith even when God seems hidden. It is in this tension that Job's lament finds its power, for it reveals the endurance of a heart that refuses to let go, even when all seems lost. Job's cries also provide a mirror for those who suffer today. His honesty gives permission to bring sorrow before God without fear of rejection. His questions remind the broken that they are not alone in their doubts and fears. His lament becomes a sanctuary where pain can be spoken, where silence can be named, and where the struggle of faith can be lived without shame. The cries from the ashes stand as some of the most hauntingly beautiful passages of Scripture. They do not offer easy answers or comforting resolutions, but they reveal a heart that continues to seek God, even in despair. In this way, Job's lament becomes a form of worship, not through joy or thanksgiving, but through the authenticity of a soul refusing to hide its wounds. The heartbreak of Job's cry lies in its depth, its honesty, and its unanswered questions. Yet within that heartbreak is a strange hope, for it shows that faith is not destroyed by pain, but revealed in its truest form. The cry from the ashes remains one of the most unforgettable expressions of the human soul in all of Scripture, a testimony to the endurance of faith when everything else is stripped away. After the long silence and the endless cycle of debates between Job and his friends, the story reaches a turning point that is as breathtaking as it is unsettling. Out of the whirlwind, God speaks. The response does not come in the form of answers to Job's questions, nor in a gentle reassurance that his suffering was understood. Instead, the voice from the storm confronts Job with a series of questions that stretch the imagination and overwhelm the human mind. These words shift the entire tone of the account, lifting the conversation from human reasoning into the realm of divine majesty. God's voice does not explain the reason for Job's suffering. Instead, he draws Job's attention to creation itself. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me, if you have understanding. Have you commanded the morning since your days began, and caused the dawn to know its place? These questions, flowing with poetic force, highlight the vastness of divine wisdom compared to the limits of human knowledge. Job is confronted not with explanations, but with perspective. The whirlwind speech reveals the grandeur of creation, the mysteries of the natural world, and the intricate care woven into every corner of existence. God describes the boundaries of the sea, the treasures of snow, the constellations in the night sky, and the wild creatures that roam the earth. The imagery is vivid and majestic, each question reminding Job of the distance between the finite and the infinite. In the face of such grandeur, Job's complaints fall silent, not because his pain has been lessened, but because his vision has been expanded. This encounter is deeply moving, but also deeply unsettling. Job had longed for an explanation, for clarity about why his life was torn apart, yet what he receives is a revelation of divine power and mystery. The silence of heaven is broken not by answers, but by a display of sovereignty. This leaves the reader with a mixture of awe and unease. God's presence is undeniable, but the reasons behind Job's suffering remain hidden. The storm does not resolve the mystery, but deepens it, drawing Job into a place of humility rather than certainty. The beauty of this moment lies in the shift it creates. Job no longer demands answers. Instead, he places his hand over his mouth, acknowledging the limits of his understanding. His words change from protest to humility, from lament to recognition of God's greatness. In seeing the vastness of creation and the power of the Creator, Job finds a form of peace, not through explanation, but through surrender. Yet the heartbreak is still present. The God who speaks does not erase the pain of lost children or the scars of illness. The wounds remain, and the questions about justice are not directly answered. The comfort comes not from information, but from encounter. Job meets the God who commands the storm, and that encounter reshapes his perspective, even while leaving the mystery intact. For the reader, this moment serves as both a revelation and a challenge. It calls humanity to humility, to recognize the limits of human reasoning in the face of divine sovereignty. It challenges the idea that every sorrow can be explained and every tragedy justified. Instead, it presents a God whose wisdom surpasses human understanding, whose ways remain beyond the grasp of finite minds. The storm speech reminds every generation that faith is not built on full knowledge, but on trust in the one who holds creation together. Job's experience points to the reality that sometimes the only answer to suffering is the presence of God himself, a presence that may not explain but can sustain. The whirlwind remains one of the most unforgettable moments in Scripture, a scene where the silence of heaven is broken not with clarity, but with majesty. After the storm, the story shifts once more. Job, humbled and repentant, finds himself restored. The narrative describes a reversal of his fortunes, with his health renewed, his wealth multiplied, and his household filled once again with joy. The one who once sat in ashes now rises to a place of honor and abundance. It is a moment of hope, showing that suffering does not have the final word. Yet within the restoration lies a complexity that makes the conclusion bittersweet. Job receives twice as much as he had before. His livestock is restored in great numbers, his reputation is renewed, and his influence among the people returns. Those who had once distanced themselves from him now gather in his house, offering him comfort and gifts. The man who had been reduced to dust and despair is now lifted up and blessed abundantly. On the surface, it appears to be a triumphant resolution, a vindication of his endurance. The gift of children is given again, 7 sons and 3 daughters, and their beauty is described as surpassing all others in the land. Job grants his daughters an inheritance alongside their brothers, a detail that underscores the fullness of his restoration and the richness of his legacy. His latter days are recorded as being greater than his beginning, with long life and peace surrounding him until the end. The picture painted is one of abundance and blessing beyond measure. Yet beneath the surface of joy, a shadow remains. The children Job lost cannot be replaced. The new sons and daughters, as precious as they are, do not erase the memory of those who perished when the house collapsed. The wound of that loss remains etched in the story, a reminder that restoration, though real, does not undo the past. The narrative acknowledges this tension without directly addressing it, leaving the reader with a complex mixture of hope and sorrow. The scars of suffering never fully disappear. Even in the midst of blessing, Job carries the memory of ashes, the echoes of his cries, and the silence that once surrounded him. His life is restored, but not to the same state it once was. It has been forever altered, shaped by loss, grief, and the encounter with God in the storm. This is what makes the ending so poignant. It is not a simple return to joy, but a new chapter written on the pages of sorrow. For the reader, the ending challenges shallow views of restoration. It reminds us that while blessings may come again and wounds may find healing, the past cannot always be undone. Job's restoration is real, but it coexists with his scars. His story shows that suffering leaves a mark, even when joy returns, and that faith is not about erasing the past, but about living with its memory in the light of God's continued presence. The restoration also affirms the resilience of faith. Job's endurance, his honesty, and his surrender in the face of mystery become the soil from which new blessings grow. His story does not end in despair, but in a renewal that honors his integrity. Yet the reader is left with the haunting awareness that restoration does not erase heartbreak. It transforms it, weaving sorrow and hope into a single tapestry. Job's ending is both hopeful and haunting, both beautiful and sorrowful. It captures the paradox of human life, where joy and grief often coexist, where restoration does not erase scars, and where faith must hold together the mysteries of both suffering and blessing. The conclusion does not silence the heartbreak of Job's story, but it does reveal that even in the ashes, new life can rise. The book of Job closes not only with the story of a man restored, but with truths etched deeply into the human heart. Truths that do not fade with time, but continue to resonate in every generation. Job's story is not just a record of one man's suffering, but a reflection of questions that every soul faces in the quiet hours of life. It forces us to grapple with the mystery of pain, the silence of heaven, and the unshakable call to trust, even when understanding is out of reach. The lessons carried within these pages are not easy, but they are enduring, written not in triumph alone, but in the tears of one who refused to let go of God, even when all else was stripped away. One of the most striking lessons is the resilience of faith in the face of the unknown. Job was not perfect in his responses. His cries were raw, his questions sharp, his lament unrelenting, but he never abandoned his relationship with God. His honesty was part of his faith, showing that true devotion does not mean silence in pain, but the courage to bring even despair before the Almighty. This challenges every shallow version of faith that hides behind polite words, reminding us that the deepest trust is often revealed not in easy praise, but in anguished cries. Another lesson comes from the failure of Job's friends. Their speeches, clothed in the language of wisdom, only deepened his wounds. They remind us of the dangers of offering simple answers to complex suffering. When grief enters the room, presence often speaks louder than explanation. Comfort does not come from accusing or correcting, but from standing with the broken, sharing their silence, and holding them close in love. The story of Job warns against the arrogance of quick answers and teaches the value of compassionate humility. The voice from the whirlwind teaches yet another truth, that God's wisdom is far greater than our own. Job longed for explanations, yet what he received was revelation. He was shown the vastness of creation, the mysteries of life beyond human control, and the majesty of a God whose knowledge surpasses all understanding. This lesson does not erase the pain of loss, but it does shift the heart toward humility and awe. It calls us to trust in the sovereignty of God, even when the reasons behind our suffering remain hidden. Job's restoration teaches that suffering does not have the final word, but it also shows that restoration is not a simple return to what once was. The scars remain, the losses cannot be undone, and the memory of pain becomes part of the story. Yet from those ashes, new life arises. Blessing and grief can coexist, and joy can be found even after the deepest wounds. This truth speaks to the complexity of human experience, where hope and sorrow often walk hand in hand. Perhaps the most profound lesson of all is that faith itself is transformed in the fire of suffering. Job emerges from his trial not with all the answers, but with a deeper encounter of God's presence. His tears did not destroy him, they shaped him. His cries were not wasted, they became the soil from which greater humility and trust could grow. This is why his story remains timeless, for it speaks not only of pain, but of transformation, not only of heartbreak, but of wisdom gained through struggle. The book of Job does not leave us with easy answers, but with enduring questions that keep faith alive. Why do the righteous suffer? Why does heaven sometimes remain silent? These questions are not fully resolved, and perhaps they are not meant to be. What we are given instead is the image of a man who held fast to God in the ashes, who spoke his pain without fear, and who encountered the divine in the storm. In his journey we find the courage to face our own. The lessons of Job are written in tears, but they shine with a strange and powerful beauty. They remind us that faith is not about having all the answers, but about holding on when answers do not come. They teach us that God's presence is greater than his explanations, that compassion is stronger than judgment, and that hope can rise even from the deepest grief. Job's story is heartbreaking, but it is also unforgettable, a mirror of every human heart that has cried out in pain and found strength in the mystery of God. If this message has touched your heart, I invite you to stay connected by subscribing to the channel so you will never miss future reflections. If you found value in this journey through the book of Job, please like this video as a way to show your support. Share your thoughts in the comments below, as your reflections and experiences add richness to the conversation. And if you know someone who might find encouragement or comfort in these words, share this video with them, so together we can spread wisdom, hope, and faith to those who need it most.